Hello and welcome to this video about Russia-Ukraine invasion. My name is Artur Rahimov, and in this video I'm going to divert from my usual topics related to briefing retraining, alternative health, because I believe the question of war and peace is extremely important. It's also, I believe, very important for future of Europe, because this is now the largest military conflict since World War II in Europe. And the beauty of this video is going to be in the following factor. Usually people discuss various events, how they are commented by Russia, by Ukraine, but I'm going to analyze the law, the Ukrainian 2019 language law. And here you have the snapshot showing this law. Why? Because interpretations of events can be very different from different sides. And here we are going to have kind of more wide look, more look kind of from the terms of history or evolution. And the topic, of course, relates to how different nations exist within the same country. So we usually have some dominant nation, and there are certain minorities. And these minorities, of course, we try to preserve their culture, their language. And this is exactly what we are going to discuss in this topic, how it was done in Ukraine and what type of law now active in Ukraine in relation to various minorities. I decided also to make this video because I realized that in the Western world there is a lot of disinformation and misinformation about position of Russia in relation to this war. Why? Because, let's say, when Russia occupied Crimea, annexation of Crimea, I've heard in the Western world the news that it was done because of the presence of natural gas. But later I checked, and actually natural gas in Crimea was discovered in the early 1990s. So while Russia waited more than 20 years to make this invasion, becomes unclear. Later, when conflict started in 2022, I've heard the news that Russia just wants more land. That was from the, again, Western side, because I haven't been in Russia for more than 30 years, even though I studied in Moscow University, graduated from high school in Russia, and Russian was my main language. So that's a very important topic also for the following reason. I spoke with many people in the Western world, in different countries, asking them the same question. What exactly is wrong in relation to Ukraine, what they did wrong, so that to angry Russian officials and to angry Russia, so that we started to invade? The answer I got from probably 97-99% of people relates to corruption and certain kind of abnormal things in the, let's say, Ukrainian government, how we recruit people for the army and so on. So nobody actually was mentioning that Ukraine, probably except one person, that Ukraine has some aggressive language policies in relation to other nations. And so this is again the beauty of this presentation, that I'm going to discuss the law. Now, when asking this many people, I also ask people who were actually involved in peace work, and that related to many people whom I asked were Quakers, or people who belong to Religious Society of France, which is famous in the Western world, in some countries like UK, especially United States and others, for the peaceful activities. And they could not, even though they were kind of semi-professionals who were supposed to know more about military conflict, they were also not able to answer this question correctly. Why correctly? Because again, we are going to discuss now the law, and this is the beauty of this presentation, because I'm going to make you an expert in the question, which is kind of extremely complex in terms of how it's described in Western media, and you probably are going to be more expert than leading politicians of Western countries, and maybe even more educated than, as I believe, probably most advanced politician now, Donald Trump, who made a lot of efforts to create peace between Russia and Ukraine. So we are going to have to discuss the official Ukrainian law, and this is again the snapshot. So there are no rumors, no speculations. It's like hard, solid, rock solid evidence. And before I'm going to start, I also want to kind of emphasize the following fact that Ukraine was and probably still is multinational, multicultural, and multilingual country. So that's very important, of course, detail. Now, what is the Ukrainian language law? It relates to establishment of Ukrainian as the only language in different settings, particularly related to functioning of different official organizations, such as schools, daycare, hospitals and clinics, colleges, universities, police, and various other administrative organizations. Now, another part of the law relates to printing media. So street stands and bookshops supposed to have at least 50% of the literature in Ukrainian language. Now, TV and radio stations, I think according to the original version of the law, were supposed to have 90% of information in Ukrainian, and I think later it was reduced to somewhere about 70 or 80%. So there are like some kind of changes in this law. Now, there is also additional factor here which is discussed in many videos, because I watched many videos on YouTube related to like how different people commented or described this law, and that relates to the one statement of the law which relates to functioning of the private businesses. So, for example, if somebody owns a restaurant or haircut place or some like barber salon, beauty salon, grocery shop, bakeries, butchers, etc., they were supposed to know Ukrainian language and provide service in Ukrainian language. And if they were not able to do so, the person can go and complain to the neighboring police station, and people from police were supposed to come, and I think there is like one warning only. But from if it's done second time, the owner of this business could be fined by somewhere around, I think, 200 euro, which is for Ukraine is like about half a month's salary. So you can imagine like it's really very large amount of money. And if you have such business, and there would be like people coming every day, like it would be impossible to run the business. So, and this is what I found actually interesting, that was discussed a lot in videos by different, again, people, by different reporters, journalists in relation to this law, even though I believe other topics also extremely important. Now, I'm going also to give you at the very end of this video an official representation by the Ukrainian government of a very short video. It's less than 3 minutes long, so at the end of this video you're going to get this link, in which people from Ukrainian government, from so-called Ukrinform, this is a snapshot, it's National News Agency of Ukraine, in Ukrainian Украинское национальное информационное агентство, or Ukrinform is a state information and news agency and international broadcaster of Ukraine, who gave the key point of this law in the short video. So let us go back to Ukraine. So Ukraine is a multilingual country, and before invasion about 17% of speakers were Russian natives, or over 8 million people. Ukraine used to have about 52 million people, so about 8.2 million people of those 52 million were Russians, and if you make math it would be like somewhere around 17%. That's an interesting number, because if we look at history of the Soviet Union, it was exactly this opposite situation for Ukrainians when they lived in the Soviet Union, like let's say 3, 5, 7 decades ago, during the previous century, most of the century, Ukrainians were part of the Russia, and they had probably about, at different times, 15, 16, 17, 18%. So like 1 in 6 people were Ukrainian. So it was second largest group of people after Russians. And when Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine became an independent country, it became exactly opposite. Now 17% were people who were Russian native speakers. Now next large group of people would be Hungarians. What is specific and kind of very, I believe, important detail about Hungarians? Hungarians live along the border with Hungary, and if we look at the map, that's a map from Wikipedia webpage called Hungarians in Ukraine. You can see actually it's called the Carpathia area. Mukachevo is a large kind of city in this area, but it's not where Hungarians live. Again, Hungarians kind of more along the border. And we can see that many regions, like with small towns and small villages, have up to 99, 98%, 97% of people who use Hungarian as their main language. So they are native Hungarians people, and they were living there for centuries. So that's kind of important detail which I'm going to mention later. 150,000 of people in total, they view themselves as native Hungarians. Now there are also about 150,000 Romanians. Some of them again would be along the border with Romania, but at the same time we can see Romanians somehow they were more dispersed within the country. So we do not have like kind of this very dense population as we can see for Hungarians. And also it's known there are also Polish and German villages which present in Ukraine. Now in this video now I want to also compare. Okay, this is what was Ukrainian law in relation to other nations and in relation to minorities. But we can think about the following thing. Okay, what were politics or practices of the European Union in relation to minorities? And I want to give you some examples of countries from the European Union in which there are some minorities live within some dominant nation. And let me start from Finland. People know, of course, that people in Finland speak Finnish language, but probably not all people are aware that actually there are two official languages in Finland. So one would be Finnish language and another would be Swedish. So there are about 5% of Swedes living in Finland, and that is about 300,000 people. So that's the image snapshot showing you kind of statistic in this area. And we may also think, okay, why Finland decided to make Swedish official language? Somebody might say, well, maybe there is like a big neighbor, you know, maybe we have a stronger army, or maybe we just want to respect local minorities and give them like rights. At the same time, again, if we look, for example, at Wikipedia, we can see that in Finland there are some administrative areas where some locals, such as Sami, Karelian, Finnish Kalo, they also use their own language in order to run their own territories. So that's kind of another detail which may be kind of representative of the common practices in the European Union. Let me give you another example. Belgium. Many people, and actually I myself as well, for a long time, even though I visited Belgium many times, different cities, lived there for months, think that there are two languages, official languages in Belgium. So there is like northern part, which is close to Netherlands. So this is where people speak Dutch, and there is south part, which is like attached to France, and this is where French-speaking population of Belgium lives. So there is like common misconception actually that there are two languages only in Belgium. Why? Because actually there is a third language, and I discovered that only like just last year. So what is the third language? Well, it's German. And what happens that after Second World War, because Germany lost in this war, some lands were given to Belgium as kind of repatriation lands, like because of we suffered from this Nazi occupation. And so, okay, we can ask, okay, how many Germans live in Belgium? And so German would be again third official language, and that's a snapshot for you from Wikipedia showing that German is the official language. And there are only 80,000, so 0.7%, less than 1% of people in Belgium speak German language, and German is official language. Okay, we can again ask the same question: why Belgians decided to include German as an official language? And again, we can get like different answers. Somebody can think maybe we decided like to have like more peace with Germany because it's kind of sign of respect that okay, German is official language, so let us have like better relationship with Germany. Maybe Germany has like a big army, maybe an element of fear. Somebody else might could think why we should, like would not punish Germans, you know, like maybe do the opposite things. So and we can again come to conclusion maybe we just decided to live in peace and have respect in relation to German. Okay, that would be another example relates to Switzerland. And there is again another common misconception that there are only 3 official languages in Switzerland. And a lot of people, probably most Europeans and probably people from other countries like let's say North America, etc., they would say, okay, in Switzerland people speak German. Again, there is like part attached to Germany. We speak also French, a more kind of western part, and south part we speak Italian. But again, if we look at official information, there is a 4th nation, and we are called Romansh. I actually never heard it. I discovered it recently again, this fact myself. And Romansh represents a small group of people. There is no large country, no big neighbor like of Romansh Empire or whatever. And it's only 60,000 people or 0.5% population. So for Switzerland, which is itself only 12 million, it's of course very small number of people living. It's like kind of medium-sized city in total. And somehow Swiss people decided to create 4th official language for Romansh people. Here again, there is no big neighbor, no somebody like to respect, to have peace with, or to be afraid of. Maybe they just decided to express their respect in relation to this small nation. And so there are therefore 4 official languages in Switzerland, and the population of Romansh people is only 60,000 people. Of course, after this discussion, somebody can say, what about some countries where there are many nations and people may speak only one language? And of course, the first examples many people can suggest would be United States and USSR, Soviet Union, because in Soviet Union we used only Russian language. And so what about natives, like how we managed to have peace and coexistence and harmony with their nations, like why they decided to do it differently. I'll touch about this topic a little bit later, but now I want to go to policies of the German Nazi during World War II and what type of policies we created on occupied lands. If we look at this topic, and if somebody studied this topic, hard to say, probably not so much these days, but what historians notice, what you can find in textbooks in relation to, again, World War II, when German Nazis occupied most of the Europe, Western Europe, and we started to move to Eastern Europe, we can see that there were different policies by German Nazi, and this is emphasized again by historians, by professionals, by people who studied this topic, that the policies were different basically in relation to 2 different groups of people. People living in the Western Europe and people who were living in Eastern Europe in relation to Germany. And here what we can find that policies in relation to Western Europe were not as harsh as in relation to Eastern Europe, and it's probably could be explained by this racial theory which was promoted by Nazi. So it is kind of a dominant race, Aryan race, to which Germans belonged, and so we were kind of highest, best nation in the world. But second nation were Western groups of people, such, for example, as Dutch, Belgians, French people. But people who were living in Eastern Europe, let's say people from Poland, Ukraine, Czech, Slovaks, etc., they were belonging to the even lower caste or lower group of people, and therefore Germans had much stricter, much harsher policies in relation to those groups of people. I actually asked one freelancer to write an article in which I asked to analyze and compare policies of German Nazi in relation to three countries: France, Poland, and Ukraine in more details. And if you want to read this article, you can click on the link below this video and get more information how, again, German Nazi expressed their policies in relation to France versus Poland and Ukraine. So France would be kind of a representative of the Western world, and how we had more freedom and have more abilities to use their own language, for example, versus Poland and Ukraine. Why? Because in relation to, again, Eastern Europe, the policy of German Nazi was so harsh that we actually wanted to convert these people from speaking their own language to using German. So, whereas in, again, Western world, we did allow, for example, to publish newspapers, to have radio, of course, with heavy censorship from Germany. So, I want to here to give you kind of a table in which I analyzed these different factors in order to compare three different situations and how they were addressed by, again, authorities in different countries. So one situation would be, what are common European Union practices in relation to certain topic, how a minority can live within some dominant culture which has a different dominant language. So there is like minority, ethnic minority, and some larger group of people who can create, of course, government, and this government would represent mostly the dominant nation which speaks a different language. So how it was done in the European Union, how it was done during World War II by Nazi in Western Europe, that would be another column in the table that I created, how it was done by World War II Nazi in Eastern Europe, and what are the Ukrainian policies according to this 2019 language law. So, okay, all official organizations had to use the dominant language. Okay, is it correct statement or not? Well, if you look, of course, at the European Union practices, that is obviously not. So, again, European Union countries, minorities, when they have like large dense population of in certain areas, as I gave an example of, they can use their own language in official organizations. Now, if we look at World War II policies of German Nazi, in Western Europe, official organizations were not supposed to use German language. So on occupied lands, they could use their own language, but very, very top kind of reports and other documents which were sent maybe to Berlin and to Germans, to the kind of Reich, to the rulers of these lands, they were supposed to be, of course, in German. But local management of administrative areas, again in such countries as France, Netherlands, Belgium, Scandinavian countries, were done in their own language. Now, but in Eastern Europe, actually, it was different because it was much heavier presence of German language, and often even local people were required to use German language, even in small villages and like small cities as well. And knowledge of German language was a huge advantage to become a leader in the city. So like imagine some local people can speak German, and that was a big advantage for them to kind of advance on the administrative ladder to get like high positions just because of their knowledge of German language. Now, if we look at the Ukrainian law, we can see that their policies were actually harsher than German policies in the Eastern Europe, not just Western, which were again mild, but you can see that this Ukrainian 2019 language law gives a harsher policies in relation to administrative management for ethnic minorities. Okay, that's only one factor we consider. Let's go to the next one. What about local newspapers? Could they be published in local languages, in languages of minorities? European Union practice, of course, whatever we like to publish, there are no restrictions, maybe except one country, which I can mention later. Like Ukrainians refer to this country. Now, if you look at World War II Nazi in Western Europe, yes, local people could publish, let's say in France, other countries, they could publish their own newspapers in French or other languages, but again, with very heavy censorship from German officials. Now, in Eastern Europe, it was not possible to publish newspapers in their own language. Let's say Ukraine, Poland, other countries. So Nazi made it impossible, illegal. We could not do it. And in Ukraine, we can see that there was a requirement of 90% of newspaper being in Ukrainian language, which was later reduced to somewhere about 70-80%. Now, let's look at the next topic. Could local radio TV or radio TV could operate in local languages? So of course, European Union, they can do it. Minorities we have local radio and TV. Now in Western Europe, they could function again with heavy censorship from German Nazi. In Eastern Europe, that was not possible. So we could not run their own radio and TV as well. All the Eastern Europe countries. Now, according to this Ukrainian 2019 language law, again, there is a requirement of 90% of radio or TV being in Ukrainian language. So you can see that again, like the politics of Ukrainian government is actually closer to Nazi policies against Eastern European nations rather than like more kind of relaxed, more loose policies which we practice in relation to Western Europeans. Okay, let us look at next factor. Local bookshops could sell the books in the local languages or languages of ethnic minorities. Of course, in European Union, there are no restrictions here. Now, during World War II, German Nazi, they did allow book sales in Western Europe, but not in Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, they could not publish the books and sell the books in bookshops in their own languages. So, according to Ukrainian, again, here kind of yes and no, because the requirement is to have 50% of books. Again, if you own a bookshop, let's say in these Hungarian lands or Russian lands, where 80-90% of people belong to ethnic minorities, still 50% of books, for some reasons, should be according to this law in Ukrainian language. Now let us look at next factor, and here would be religious ceremonies could be organized in local languages or languages of ethnic minorities. So of course European Union does not have restrictions in this area. Now during World War II, German Nazi did allow to have functioning of churches in Western Europe, but not in Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, in fact, it's very known kind of to historians that there was severe persecutions, for example, in Poland of Polish priests. So they could not have any ceremonies at all. Now, according to Ukrainian law, we do allow actually having religious ceremonies to be organized in local language. So in this respect, we can see that it's kind of more peaceful, more natural approach to solving this kind of dilemma, this problem, when there are ethnic minorities who have different language. Now, local private businesses need to know the dominant language. So this is kind of the requirement statement. Is it practice of European Union? No, it's not practice of European Union countries. Again, local businesses can operate we may make their own money, so we can decide what languages we use. Many videos exist on this topic, and you can see that people actually unhappy about presence of this law in Ukraine. Now, so private business need to know the language of the dominant nation. That was not also the part of German Nazi policies, both in Western and Eastern Europe. That means private businesses in Eastern Europe could function using only their own language in order. There was no requirement for them to know German language in order to function, to exist. There was no punishment for them if they were not able to speak German. But again, according to 2019 Ukrainian language law, we can see again that their policies were harsher than German Nazi against Eastern Europeans. So that's just kind of things which we can infer, which we can get from this language law. And this is like something you can not argue with. This is a document, this is a paper which you can find, you can analyze. There are a lot of, again, information related to this law, 2019 language law. And if we look at this official video, just in the description of the video, this is what we write there. The Ukrainian parliament has approved a new language law which stipulates state and government affairs should be conducted in Ukrainian, but does not restrict the language used in private communication or religious ceremonies. So this is how they describe themselves, again, Ukrainian officials, their nature, like kind of the scope, again, how it's applied of this 2019 language law. Now, there is another detail here which I believe also relates to invasion by Russia into Ukraine in 2022. Why? Because when this law was approved in 2019, there was given a 3-year grace period for people to learn the language, because let's say if some areas in Ukraine, people like Russians or Hungarians, they did not know the language at all, it would take time for them, and for adults especially, of course longer time than for younger people, to learn the language, and that was given 3 years time. Ukrainian government provided free service, free schools, help for them to learn the language, and so that was explains also why, because Russian invasion actually started, I think, somewhere around maybe 2 months before this law in relation to businesses and other things came in force. So and that's also, in my view, was a big factor in explaining the timing of this invasion. Now, here, when we have like this type of law ideas, we can think about, of course, more kind of practical, simple things related to topics that I already mentioned a little bit, because remember I mentioned that Germans, we viewed Western Europeans as maybe like higher race people, like kind of more advanced, maybe humans, in comparison with Eastern European people who were to be converted into German-speaking population. So you see here, we can see that Germans actually were seeing Eastern European people in future as people who would speak German. See, that was the vision of the future. And we can think, of course, about the same topic. Okay, what was the vision of Ukrainian people, Ukrainian official people who approved this law? Later it was signed by the president of Ukraine and some other officials, so it became like official law. We can see that actually it looks like the desire of Ukrainians was to convert all other nations into Ukrainian-speaking people. Okay? So Russians have to learn, Hungarians, Romanians, all other people had to learn Ukrainian language in order to live in this country. So that's kind of how it looks like. Now, I want to give you some mental exercises so maybe some logical, some abstract exercises, in order to understand this situation better. As I believe they are going to help you to have more clarity, because generally questions when relates to different nations, people have, I believe, certain strong evolutionary instinct, probably maybe related to our past, our evolution. Why? Because, for example, in chimpanzee culture, when chimpanzee lives in different communities, if a chimpanzee goes into a different community, it's almost like a death sentence. This chimpanzee is going to be killed by people, species of another community, by members of another community, with probably one exception. If a female is in estrus, when she has sexual swelling, and she can get pregnant and produce children, then she are able to travel from one community to another, and it seems that this is how we prevent inbreeding. So females often travel when we are again in a state of being able to get pregnant and have babies from members of the new community, and this is how they travel. But for ordinary chimpanzees, and for all males, so the situation would be so that the traveling to a territory of another chimpanzee community group is deadly exercise, so extremely dangerous. Of course, we would not go, and that's why humans, I believe, inherited this kind of suspicion, maybe fear of other nations, and that's why, of course, this type of conflicts are very easy to generate if it's required. Like maybe in some situations they can easily appear. And so the exercise that I want to suggest you to make some replacement of one group of people by another. It's of course purely mental exercise, but it helps us maybe to have kind of more understanding of the situation. And the first example what I want to give you is following. The largest city, Donetsk, in the part where Donbass is located, where like most Russians live, is again, it's called Donetsk. But what happens that this city actually has, I myself was surprised when I learned it, has British origins. Okay, the city was organized by a British person, and this is the area where we have coal and we have some minerals to make steel and etc. So it actually was good already in 19th century as industrial city, because we started to produce these metals and make machines, make like trains, and build factories. So it was a good place to start a business. And what happens, one man from Wales, he took many skillful workers from Wales as well, and we moved to this area, like you can imagine, so far away, like from the UK, from Wales to Donetsk, and he started there a city. So the city was actually originated by a British person, and therefore what happens historically, the central part of the city where these people from Wales lived got a name. It was called English Colony. So it was of course mistake, because English and Wales, England and Wales, these are different parts, but probably people who lived in 19th century, for them it was not so important. We just heard English language and we decided to call it English Colony. So that was official name of the main central part of the Donetsk city, which is, I think, about 700,000 or 800,000 people, like close to million, the largest city in this Donbass area. And it has, I think, somewhere around 70% of population who call themselves native Russians. So you can imagine, later, of course, many Russians lived, but the mental exercise, what I want you to suggest is following. Assume that there are not like thousands of British people who moved there, but many more, let's say 50,000 or 100,000, a lot of British people. Make an assumption like this, and assume that these people lived in Donetsk and they spoke English. They had their own, of course, daycare, their own schools. They could send probably their children study back to the UK so that they can continue learning English there. And should they live in modern times, they would probably watch, I don't know, Manchester United or maybe Liverpool now, like this football or soccer team. We would watch Coronation Street, we own James Bond, etc. So we have our own culture based on the language, on their connection with the UK. And now assume, again, make a kind of assumption that these people now need to speak, according to this law, 2019 language law, Ukrainian language. They cannot keep any longer. They own daycare, they own primary schools, middle school, high school, universities, colleges, and even businesses need to learn, need to be able to use Ukrainian language in order to serve people. So how would the UK government react to this event? So there are, like, let's say, very large number, 100,000, maybe more people, maybe like 500,000 British people living somewhere. There are some communities like this actually, where there are large populations of British people as well living, let's say, in Spain, some other places. And so what would be the reaction of the UK government in this type of situation? Because now Ukrainian government provides weapons, money, support to the Ukrainian government. So British helped the Ukrainians. But how we would react if this hypothetical situation existed in real life, the same as Russians had to experience due to this 2019 language law? Okay, now I can make you kind of another mental exercise. As I already mentioned, in Ukraine before this conflict, there were about 8 million Russian people living, like native Russians, especially again in this Donbass area. And I want to now to have a following mental exercise. Assume that we have about 8 million Germans, not Russians, living in this area of Ukraine. Okay, and of course assume that if there is such a large number, 8 million, it's like a kind of, it's like a typical Scandinavian country would have about 8 million population. It's like a lot of people living. So we would of course have their own all type of daycare, schools, universities, colleges, celebrities, etc., etc. Speaking, of course, again, not Russian, but speaking German. And of course, we would have very tight connections with Germany. And again, a lot of families probably would send their children to study in Germany. So we learn German, we come back, and they can use their own language and continue to maintain, to keep their culture, speaking German language while living in Ukraine. So how would Germany react to this 2019 language law if we have again 8 million Germans living in Ukraine and experiencing the effects of this 2019 language law, which I previously described? So just imagine this situation. Would Germany be willing then to, again, to kind of to help Ukraine to maintain this type of affairs, with this type of management of a country? Now we can also imagine more real situation, not even hypothetical, but okay, let us think about Hungarians. I mentioned there are about 150,000 Hungarians in total living in Ukraine. Most of them are concentrated along the border with Hungary. So it's kind of western part called Zakarpattia in Ukrainian, where again in some cities, villages, areas, regions, small regions near Hungary, up to 98-99% of people are native Hungarians. And we can think about these native Hungarians again who lived there for many centuries. And if we think about the history, we can think, oh, these people actually lived under Lenin time, when Soviet Union just was created, under Stalin, during repressions, and we were still speaking their own Hungarian language. And then Nazi came. Nazi probably tried to change them, but it was like just too short period of time. They did not succeed. And then it was Soviet Union time, and they were still living using the Hungarian language. And now Ukrainian nationalists in 2019 arrived, and we say now you no longer can have your own daycare, you can no longer have your schools, speaking Hungarian language. It's all now should be in Ukrainian. This is the only one official language which we allow on the whole territory of Ukraine. So we can think, okay, who made like the strongest impact, German Nazi or current Ukrainian nationalist? And so that would be kind of another exercise, mental exercise, which would allow you to kind of imagine what is the type of situation which exists now in Ukraine and what exactly happened with Hungarian population. Let's look at this snapshot which I made using artificial intelligence. We actually say that somewhere about between 1/2 and 1/3 of Hungarian population is no longer there. So these 150,000 of Hungarians which will live again on these territories are no longer there because it's now somewhere what is like 80,000, 100,000. We do not know, of course, exactly numbers. But the thing is, these are not parts which are affected by the war. It's exactly the opposite end of Ukraine, where there is probably least military activities. There are some drones, of course, and Russia makes all type of attacks, explosions. But again, this is the furthest part from the front line. And that means it should not be, of course, strongly affected at all. So the question is, okay, why is the population dropped so much? So, like, artificial intelligence suggests that according to some sources, 1/3 of this population is no longer there. Some say 1/2. One may assume that these Hungarians, especially males who were supposed to be in the army, they probably do not want to protect Ukrainian state, the country, from Russians. And that also makes you kind of understand, because when the conflict started, Hungary was the country which was blocking attempts to send billions of money, to send weapons to Ukraine. So we were actually kind of in union, in maybe kind of friendship, more with Russia rather than with European Union. And that's fact kind of also not discussed, virtually not discussed at all by Western media. Why all of a sudden Hungary would be together with Russia, also right now, let's say, getting Russian gas, oil resources, rather than being with the European Union. But now we actually have the clear answer, because Hungarians there live under this 2019 language law. And that law leads to destruction or elimination of the Hungarian population or their culture or their language. And this is why, like about, I think 1 or 1.5 years ago, I started to listen Russian radio and Russian news, official state news, just trying to get like what is going on during this conflict. Because why on the Western world we say Russia is a pure aggressor, like just out of nowhere we decided to get more land, more natural resources, and to expand themselves, and later we want to go to Europe and do the same. So is it true or not? I started to listen Russian news, and I think Foreign Minister Lavrov said that actually the question here is about preservation of Russian culture within Ukraine. Why? Because it's an attack on Russian population, on Russian culture. And it follows from this analysis, from this, again, official document, 2019 language law in Ukraine. This is absolutely true. Now, we can also look at one following detail which I discovered. There is an organization which is called Human Rights Watch. It's an independent organization with decades of different type of work, of respect, because these are the people who watch different spots in the world, hot areas, it can be anywhere in the world, in order to attract attention of people, so that if there are certain potential conflicts which can arise there, they try to again attract attention, so that other countries, other organizations are able to reduce the tension between countries, between nations. And so Human Rights Watch published actually in 2022, January 19, 2022. This is a snapshot. The article called "New Language Requirement Raises Concerns in Ukraine." the law needs safeguards to protect minorities' languages right. And that is the article that was written by Deputy Director of Europe and Central Asia Division. So I'm going to give you here snapshots about this article from Human Rights Watch. You can see the person and Human Rights Watch again. So, and here, yeah, we just make statements about specific kind of targeting of Russian population by this document. So this 2019 language law, according to this organization, based by the way in New York. So this is a Western organization created by Western people, probably by Western money, but it's independent. It's closely related to, of course, like United Nations, working in cooperation with different other organizations. But they actually emphasize that this law actually is no good. This law is against minorities and specifically against Russian population. So this is what they say. Now, when discussing this type of topics, kind of when we try to balance different things, it's good also to analyze so-called mitigating factors. You know, like when it is like in courts and laws, you know, when we analyze complex situations, because such factors normally exist, and certainly in these situations there are actually really strong real reasons for Ukrainians to be unhappy, maybe in a way, probably unhappy, unsatisfied with the situation which appeared in relation to Ukrainian language, in relation to Ukrainian population, and disappearance of Ukrainian language. Okay, as I already mentioned before, in the Soviet Union, Ukrainian was first secondary language, so it was second largest group of people, Ukrainians, which were in different periods of the Soviet time, somewhere about 15, 17, 18% of population of the whole Soviet Union. So 15, 18% population, so it was second nation, and that's, I can give you a snapshot of the USSR nations, the pie so-called, so how many people. And what happens later, if we look at another part of statistic, we can find that over 50% of Ukrainian speakers, of Ukrainian natives, became Russian speakers. I've been in Kiev many times. I've been in Kiev in 90s, I've been in Kiev in just like 3 years ago, 2 years ago, when conflict just started as well. I also was in Kiev as well. And when walking in the city, of course for me, because again Russian became my main language, I could easily pick up Russian, Ukrainian little different, and sometimes you can't understand at all, and generally if somebody says a sentence would be really hard to understand even what we are talking about. But what I found that somewhere maybe 60-70% of population around people, like when we speak with each other, would just use Russian. And some other people, again smaller, around maybe 30%, would use Ukrainian. So the analysis by, again, artificial intelligence shows that, let's say, in 1990s, most people in Ukraine used Russian, let's say, within their families and within the work setting. So when we have some jobs, when we have some businesses, we would likely to use Russian language as well. And so that's the image showing this fact. Now, as I already mentioned, when Soviet Union collapsed, the table reversed. So in the Soviet Union, again, we had about 16-17% populations were Ukrainians. Now, when Ukraine separated, within Ukraine, there were 16-17% of Russians, exactly the opposite. And maybe we can think, okay, maybe Ukrainians decided kind of to, in order to restore their nation, to restore the culture, language, to pay back and to make those Russians which lived in Ukraine to speak Ukrainian language, to convert them into Ukrainian speaking population. And so it's kind of a tricky topic. Why? Because here, you know, in Russia, we can think did Russia practice any harsh or any forceful policies in relation to Ukrainian population to convert them into Russian speakers? Why? Because again, on the West, they call it Russification. So kind of during Soviet times, Russia was converting people into their own language, and quite successfully. Let's say Belarus is a country like probably 90% population or more just speak Russian language. So that's another example here. And the general topic which I'm discussing right now has actually a name. I never heard this name in media, in like radios, news, etc. So somehow this name escapes, but this name is actually official, and people who are working in this area, maybe like specialists in languages, etc., we know this expression. It's called language imperialism. Language imperialism, so a kind of empire created by some language, and that language kind of absorbs within themselves some smaller minorities and some smaller groups of people. So there is language imperialism. There is here a snapshot, an article here from Wikipedia called Language Imperialism. And again, going back, did Soviet Union practice these kind of forceful policies? Because it's kind of difficult and complex topic. Why? Because if you look at language imperialism, I read articles both in English language and in Russian language. And in English language we say it's kind of natural phenomenon which occurs when there is a larger nation and smaller groups of people, they naturally start to speak and use this language because of high dominance of culture. There are radio, news, TVs, songs, movies for children, cartoons, etc., making it likely for minorities to start using dominant language. It gives them advantage as well to get better education, as an example, to get better jobs. And that is why it's all over the world present. So with time, we can see it's kind of normal, common, that there is a process of disappearance of smaller nations, and that's a part of language imperialism. But when I read actually an article in Russian about language imperialism, we read actually that this is a nasty phenomenon of capitalistic or imperialistic regime when they convert local people into their own language, into their own culture. Even though actually this is what happens in Russia kind of in a natural way. Why a natural way? Well, let me give you an example here. This channel actually devoted a lot, 90% probably about, to briefing retraining and Buteyko method. So Dr. Buteyko was Ukrainian, and here is an example of his life. So he grew up, he studied in Ukrainian school, but in order to study medicine, he went to the first Moscow Medical Institute. And of course, to study there, you have to learn Russian, you have to pass exams, even to become a student of this institute. So of course, he knew Russian quite well. But the question which I'm going to ask is following. Okay, so he was Ukrainian, and he later lived, studied in Moscow. He got like his degree there. He became a doctor. Then he worked in a laboratory in Novosibirsk in Siberia as well, of course, Russian-speaking part. Was there any kind of persecutions, any forceful use of Russian language, or kind of maybe some derogatory phenomena related to his Ukrainian origins? If you read all type of biographies and documentaries and again papers related to Dr. Buteyko life, there would be none. And if somebody asked me, okay, did Russia practice like completely normal or harmonious or peaceful policies in relation to all nations, my answer, again, with my knowledge of Russia and traveling, and I was probably nearly all, due to participation in competitions, traveled in all type of republics, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, Belarus. What I commonly found in big cities, people usually would speak Russian, but if you go to villages, Sometimes local people could not understand you, but if you just need to go to a shop, it's easy, so you can explain what you need to buy. And what I realized here, what I think, and later what I read about, it seems to be that Russia was really friendly in relation to smaller minorities, with one exception. It was a group of people who were part of, let's say, belonging to a group which relates to Western world, because Soviet Union was very ideological country. And there are actually true examples when Soviet officials during Soviet times were extremely aggressive in relation to, for example, some German villages. So there are like examples of Germans living in on Black Sea, and they were just completely demolished. People were sending like to some to labor camps, some to other parts. So the idea was to completely disassemble, kind of disorganize, to eliminate culture, group of people speaking their own language, so that to convert them, like to kind of absorb them, indeed, so that German as language does not exist any longer. So that was an example I know about, and it seems to be there are some other examples of the similar type, but talking about like some Asian groups of people, Ukrainians, Belarusians, etc. It seems to be that Russia policy, the policy of the Soviet Union was very balanced and peaceful, so that actually these people just learn Russian, and it's a bigger culture, and much could provide much bigger opportunities. Thinking about, again, example that I already provided with Dr. Buteyko, if you think that assume that he did not go to Moscow, he decided to study maybe in Kiev, some other cities in Ukraine, and he became a doctor, probably he would never make this grandiose discovery about briefing retraining, Buteyko method, like how to treat these nasty diseases of civilization, cancer, asthma, etc., heart disease, diabetes, cancer. Then we can see here that actually presence of this Russian language in abilities of Dr. Buteyko to learn the language, and his chance to become a doctor, work with leading scientists, and use all type of help and support, and doing this spaceship research in 1960s, what he did. This is all these things which allowed to see that there's actually a harmonious relationship between different nations, so that we can see like a person from Ukraine, like Dr. Buteyko, were able, by knowing Russian language, to become a world-class scientist, to make like such again fundamental discoveries in healthcare and medicine, due to again help and support in Moscow and Novosibirsk of again Soviet authorities speaking Russian and giving all this help. So I could not find any signs again of derogatory kind of remarks or things related to his Ukrainian origins, even though probably they could exist, like he was Ukrainian, and people who were persecuting him later, like let's say some officials, some state officials in Novosibirsk, in Moscow, they were Russian people, and seems to be it was not a part of culture to kind of have this factor in his personal life to be Ukrainian, to use it against him. So that's why I believe that even though Soviet Union had extremely aggressive policies in relation to certain groups of people, maybe from Baltic republics, maybe Jews, maybe, as I mentioned, Germans, etc. But it was not in relation to, again, majorities of those people who were Asian people and Ukraine, Belarus, etc. So now we can also think about the following kind of maybe related topic here. Is this language imperialism is always like negative thing? So this part kind of I described, but the following question could be: is there any country in the world which is a victim of this language imperialism? So a victim of language imperialism, an expression that I decided to use. And Thinking about this kind of simple question, I realized that there is actually a large country, quite known country, which became converted into completely different language, and it's actually made a lot of good, I believe, for this country. And this country, if you think about, like, again, like I never think about like any people who completely changed their origins and started to speak a totally different language, and that's Ireland. Because I've been many times in Ireland, lived there for months, and actually, so if you look at statistic here, less than 1% of people use Irish language, like Gaelic, in their families. So 99% somewhere speak. Even though there are a lot of signs and there are we have like radio, etc. Official people sometimes you can see that we use their own language, but we convert it to English. So due to British influence, of course. But the question what I want to discuss here shortly, is it a completely negative event? Was it like completely negative thing for Ireland to become English-speaking country? And the answer probably would be not, because if we look now at the three wealthiest countries in the world, so wealthiest country by the GDP, like factors, like of course it's like little bit maybe artificial how we define it, but Ireland actually is there. So, and Ireland actually we can see is doing extremely well, even though the virtually like whole population from speaking Gaelic language especially during 19th century, converted into English-speaking people. So we can see that actually it's kind of, we cannot say that this is like completely negative thing, although for Ireland we can say that it's a big advantage, because on the one hand now we have a big kind of maybe more possibilities for businesses, for people to travel, to have relationship with the UK and also with the United States. So knowledge of particularly English became a huge advantage. It's absolutely correct idea, correct kind of factor related to Ireland. And so, but going back again to simple reality of Ukraine, so it seems to be that Ukrainian leaders wanted and want to make existing Russian and other population to convert them to Ukrainian and maybe pay back to this kind of Soviet past. And so that's how it looks like. And at the same time, we can also now go maybe to wider topic. And so the topic would be, okay, what about European Union? Why these people cannot analyze the politics of Ukrainian government in relation to nations, to minorities, which existed in Ukraine and which exist in Ukraine right now? Why all of a sudden we became so aggressive in relation to Russia? That probably would be now the correct topic after we discussed this kind of contribution politics of particularly of again like Germany, France and the UK. These are kind of main supporters of Ukraine in this conflict. Why they became so aggressive in relation to Russia? It's actually a big psychological and historical and evolutionary topic, as I believe. And at the same time, we can also have a look at the topics related to what Russia did after collapse of the Soviet Union since 1990s. So Russia actually wanted to join European Union. It was kind of even before President Vladimir Putin. So that was kind of an intention of the country. And it was kind of ignored, denied, so we did not allow Russia to do that. Even though we could probably provide, okay, tell you what is wrong with maybe specific things which exist in current Russia or which existed in 1990s. Probably that would be a smart thing to do, but that was just a wall of rejection from 1990s. Now we can also analyze or think about the following thing. When President Bill Clinton of the United States visited Russia and he met with the Vladimir Putin president, Vladimir Putin suggested to him that Russia actually wants to join NATO. And that was officially known because Putin later discussed this with journalists, reporters, telling. And Clinton was actually enthusiastic about that. But later he went to his team, to his like generals and other officials, and we say no. So again, like why virtually nobody, like kind of discusses these very strong attempts to establish relationship, cooperation, and peace made by Russia, and nobody wants to discuss this part. Again, Russia was rejected. So there is kind of fear which exists in this country, and that's why Russian media now, during like all these previous years, have a word which I could hear many times. It's called Russophobia. So like kind of fear of Russian, and why does it exist? So what are the origins here? And I believe this topic relates to another topic which I want to explore maybe in later videos. Maybe even I want to write a little book short in these topics about the origins of the West. So who were specific people and spiritual leaders who created the Western world? Because Western world made a huge impact. Like whatever we have right now in the world, it's actually was hugely, like, I don't know, 95, 97, 99% was influenced by Western world, who created United Nations and many other great good things, help countries in Africa, Latin America, Asia, with the education, with fighting diseases, prevention of conflicts, etc., etc. But I believe from 1990s, West actually changed dramatically. And I also want to analyze in later videos what exactly happened in the Western world and why from 1990s the West actually changed, I believe, in a spiritual sense. So that's why kind of this topic of military conflict between Russia and Ukraine is hugely important. Now, there is small detail also in 2019 language law. There is a phrase, national security, mentioned many times in this official document. And I do not know why we decided to do so, because I'm certain that in, let's say, language law of Finland or Belgium or Switzerland, we do not need to suggest the idea of national security. So why it is so, I don't know. Maybe some secret agents from Kiev suggested certain things or whatever here, but it's a bit of a mystery, but also kind of certain detail which kind of makes you think about, okay, why national security and what is the contribution of national security to this law. And now probably that would be now close to the end, which I want to have very soon. But I want maybe mention small idea that, you know, when German Nazis occupied Denmark, Danish soldiers were actually refusing to follow orders given by German officers in German language. But when orders were given in Danish language, in their own language, they were obeying them. So German officers were learning Danish language in order to give orders to Danish soldiers. So that's kind of a fact which relates to how military servicemen use the language, and how, again, this video clip which I'm going to give you, because it starts with this idea that military servicemen had to learn German language. So that's kind of, before I'm going to give you this link to the video. But the key general conclusion which I want to make here is that starting from 1990s, I believe that Western countries no longer provide true information to their people about events in the world and events in Europe. And no, they are no longer spiritual leaders of the world. So this is like the conclusion we have to arrive after analysis of this 2019 language law. So finally, I want to tell you that if you look at my more than 200 videos on my YouTube channel, I never had an idea or suggestion to you, or my request to like or to promote my videos on your Facebook, your Telegram, or whatever, like if you have some people to share with. My videos, the links to my websites or whatever. So this is not, again, you would not find me asking in any of my like more than 250 videos which I made for more than 15 years. But for this one, I would certainly, I'm going to ask you, if possible, please share this link, share this video if you find this information useful, because it's, again, it relates to question of war and peace. And finally, here's the video link to this official video from Ukrinform, official government organization of the Ukraine, about this Ukrainian 2019 language law. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.